Hey folks, welcome back to DJ Tutorials. Today we are going to be looking at a simple dice roll animation for usage anywhere. As some of you may know, my main job is working on interactives and interactive content for higher education. And one of the things that I did recently was a set of dice roll animations to sort of replicate a randomized dice roll to come up with some discussion topics for a classroom. So basically, what I did is I took some of these animations that I did that were basically pre rendered, but set it into an interactive so that it felt like it was a randomization. So in that process, I learned a couple things on the best way to approach this sort of dice roll animation. So I wanted to share that with you all. So let's take a look at this project file here. And this is going to be available on my Gumroad. So if you really want to see how the project is put together with my background and everything else, you can feel free to download that. The link is below in the video description, along with some links to how you can actually make this little 1d4 or any other kinds of dice that you want to use for this type of animation. So first, let's just talk about the basic idea about why I go with this approach. What I first tried to do was I tried to do some physics and have just a dice that kind of like roll onto a table and stuff like that. But with simulations and with physics and stuff like that, it can be kind of a pain to get it to be where exactly you want it to be for a video or an animation or something like that, so that you have I'm just going to turn that off there, so that you can have just a generalized way of, rendering that out and have it just kind of like stable so that you can set up a camera where you want it to be. And then, especially when you change the numbers that's going to be revealed on the top. So, for example, if I go to the camera view here, and we roll to here, you can see that the 1 is available on the top there. And then on some of the other dice that I have here, the different numbers are on the top. So to make it a little bit more stable and to have this exact same camera in the same position, I used a different approach. So if we take a look at it through the camera here, we can actually scrub through it, and you can see that it basically hits the board or the table and then bounces and then settles into that position there perfectly in our camera view here. And if I turn on, let's say, dice 3, we have the exact same type of animation where it hits, it bounces, and then it goes into that position there. So really nice and simple. And no physics are required for this. And if we take a look at the actual dice itself, you can see that there's a keyframe here and a keyframe here. One thing that I found out with a lot of animations is that the simpler your keyframes are, the better, and then add some other sorts of modifiers later to change how this object will move around in the scene, either with an empty, which you can see here, I have an empty right there. If I drill down here, you can see there's an empty dice right there that has a couple different keyframes. And then if I take a look at, if I change this here to the graph editor, you can see that if I select the dice here, there is a set of what looks like keyframes for this bouncing effect here. And if I take these like this here, just so I can show what these look like, you can see that there is a bounce animation, although those are not keyframes and there's no physics being used. And if we select the Z location, and you look over here, you can see that where it says active keyframes, the interpolation method right here is changed to bounce. And this is a really cool effect because basically you can have a bouncing animation without actually doing a lot of work. So basically what happens here is if you change this and you move it to what it usually is, which is like a Bezier, it's something like this, which if we look up here, you can see that it just kind of slides into place and it's sort of like rotating. Okay. Now that's not really going to help us. So what we do is we change this to a bounce effect, and then you get this really fun little bouncing. And if you have a keyframe in the beginning for where it starts, so if I move this down a little bit, you can see that this keyframe here, it's up there with a set of rotations. And then when we go to the end frame here, we have the set of rotations here so that the 1 is on the top and it's sort of angled towards the camera and it's located exactly where we want it to be on the board. Now what happens is if I take my dice here, and you can see here that in the object constraints I have a parent-child relationship with this empty. If I turn this off and we go to one of these bounces, like this one, let's say right here, you can see that it kind of goes through the board. And that's because where the center of this is, if we go to the final frame, you can see that the center is right in the middle there. But if we rotated this in any particular way, you can see that it can go right through the board. So we have to check every time that it's supposed to hit that board that it's actually not going through. Okay. So if I turn back on the empty here, which I just kept it there, I kept it at the final location there. And I basically just, if I go to the actual keyframes here, so if I change this to the timeline, you can see that I have a keyframe here, so it's set there. I have a keyframe here, which is set to that, and then a keyframe here, which is set to that there to make sure that it doesn't actually go through the board as it bounces. So you could add animations for this where or animation keyframes where you set that position on the z axis, and every time it bleeds through, instead of using an empty, you set keyframes on the actual object itself. But if you do that, if you wanted to change it so that the 2 or the 3 or the 4 is visible on the top, you're going to have to change those animations for each and every one. So instead of doing that on this like base object here, I did that with an empty instead, which made it a lot easier to have these different ones visible at the top so that it could replicate that dice roll animation without me having to do a whole bunch of other work. So just to make sure that this quick tutorial is kind of clear, and this is a lot different than my other tutorials, I'm not going to show you step by step every single thing. I really do recommend that you try this yourself. Basically, what you'll want to do is get your D4, set it up where you want it to begin with off your frame where you've set your camera, set your keyframe, go to where your final resting position is there. Make sure that all of your rotation and location are set there so that it does a nice little animation roll. Make sure that on this keyframe here, this first one, if we go to the graph editor, you can see here the Z location. That is where I set this bounce animation, which sets it up like this here. And then you'll want to use an empty right here to check those particular places where it might go through. If we turn that off, you can see there it goes through. Turn this on, the parent-child relationship with that empty. If we turn that on, you can see that I moved it up a bit, so there's a little bit of an animation with that empty there. And it's set right there so that when we look through our camera with the rendered view, we have a really nice finalized animation where we get this really neat little dice roll, and you can replicate this, basically take this object, rotate it so a different number's on the top, change a couple of your other keyframes with the empties that you might duplicate, and then basically set up a nice little set of animations. And if you're like me and you do interactives or something where you want some sort of like fun, faked sort of randomization to go with your interactive, or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Maybe you're doing this for a board game product render or something like that. You can get a really cool set of randomized results like that there. You could do this with a D20, you could do this with a D6, you could do this with all different types of polyhedral dice. That's going to be it for this quick tutorial. Hopefully you learned something. Please leave a question or comment below in the comments section. If you get lost or anything like that, you can ask those questions and I can answer those, or you can jump onto the Discord, which the link is also down below. Thanks so much to all of my YouTube members and all of my patrons. You guys are awesome. If you want to become a patron or a member, please click the links. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.